Everyone in the corporate sector says there should be more incentives given to corporate India for R&D investments. And this has been a long-standing demand. There have been many changes. In fact, there's been a rollback of the incentives that the government was providing. But if India truly has to lead when we talk about innovation, especially digital technologies, what do you believe the government can do to facilitate or spur private investment in R&D?
I was just recently reading a paper, and they identified 44 critical technologies which are critical both for security as well as for industry, as well for leadership. And of course, the big worry there was China is dominant in about 35 of them. They're number one, not United States. But the more interesting thing is that in about 30 of them, India is in the top 5. So, I mean, let's not be sad about what Indian R&D is doing. There is a lot of good R&D going on in India. But the fact of the matter is, are we getting into products and are we getting into brands? And I think the point you said there was earlier. I'll combine the two and answer. Number one, I think there is a development life cycle even in industry. You first need to get into manufacturing. I mean, a lot of manufacturing has got hollowed out in India. I mean, in his own sector, Indian telephone industries was the first public sector. And then we started importing a lot of stuff. So I think we're getting back onto the rails. So let's get into mass manufacturing first. That's what China did. But just wait, in 4-5 years, from mass manufacturing, China has now brands. And there are brands everywhere. So I foresee the large-scale production that is there in PLIs gradually transforming into brands, because at some point the company who's actually doing manufacturing for a third party is going to think, why can't I make my own brand? So I think that's what the evolution is. We never supported scale. Let the scale come in. Once the scale comes in, I mean, human innovation will take them to brands. Coming back to R&D, I think issue is not about tax benefits or whatever. I think the primordial urge of industries to survive and grow requires them to invest in R&D. And they are doing it. I mean, look at our automobile sector. And I'm going back to my past position wherever I was. You talk to the two-wheeler industry in India. The two-wheeler industry in India is global, the world-beating, and they're the best. They're not terrified about any two-wheeler from some other country. Go to EVs. In two-wheeler EVs, today India is top gun. Nobody can beat India in two-wheeler EVs in the kind of technology. And it's not that you're making the two-wheeler. It's the inner components, the parts, the touch screens, all of them are now designed in India. There's nobody else who can be there. I think that's where, be it the FAME program, be it the PLIs, as we push more into these areas, I'm quite sure R&D is as important as manufacturing. It will happen in consonance, and you've got departments which are individually supporting R&D.
Mr. Rajaraman, since we are talking about manufacturing, let me very quickly get an update from you on the semiconductor plans. Again, a very aspirational, ambitious plan that we put on the table in terms of manufacturing semiconductors here in India. What's the update, sir? We've all been waiting for one.
So this is with the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology.
I know, but I know that the government doesn't work in silos anymore.
Yes,
At least that's what we
right.
keep hearing.
Yes, but then I think the process of calling for proposals are in the final stage of examination. So we expect some decisions probably in a month or two. So at the end of the day, it is a process. So it is just not about announcing a set of initiatives. A lot of initiatives are already happening. Like for instance, we in India have a very strong fabless design capability in Bangalore and many other parts of the country. I think, in fact, most of the multinational companies have their back-end fabless chip design facilities in India. So the R&D headcount is huge. I think. So the capabilities already exist in India, except we need to move to the next stage of fabrication. In fact, that is being overcome by the industry by actually sending it out to other countries. So I wouldn't say it's a disability, but if you go to large-scale manufacturing, well, it is in a sense. So I think maybe in a couple of years from now, I think once this initiative takes off, so there are 2-3 parts to it. One, of course, is to set up the fab facility, for which I think probably the decisions are in a very advanced stage. The other thing is to create the ecosystem that will support it. That's very, very important, because you need the skill sets and you need the supply chain, because both are very critical to the semiconductor industry. A supply chain which is very, very specialized, I think rare gases and specialty chemicals and so on and so forth. So that is something which the government is actually working with, and I think there are a number of producers already in India who are now being kind of and kind of coordinated into producing to scale and to the quality that the semiconductor industry requires. And also, the government is also actively working with the industry in actually building the skill sets that are required for manufacturing. So therefore, that requires people with lithography skills, the EDA tools, etc., etc. So I think a number of institutions and number of collaborations are on the job, including design of advanced chipsets, etc. And as far as our department is concerned, we've also launched a sub-mission to look at about 3-4 telecom chipsets, which are crucial to telecom manufacturing, and we'll also be working on them, I think.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Dilip Asbe, you're headed to the G20 Sherpa meeting in Kumarakom. You are going to be presenting your story, the UPI story, the NPCI story there tomorrow morning. Why don't you give us a sneak peek on what the story is going to be that you tell the G20 here with us here in the audience?
So Shirin, I think we just have been talking about how the UPI can help any other country. We have spent about 12, 13 years now building up the digital payment story of India. So why the country has to spend all the time, all the efforts, right? So that's a pitch back to the other countries. Obviously, it's their choice to use or not to use, but we are kind of looking at a knowledge support. We are looking at a software support under the regulator-to-regulator arrangement. We are also giving the source code to the central banks, so that they are self-sufficient and they are not dependent on India for that matter. So these are the kind of things, and obviously, how do we make the cross-border efficient? Because one of the G20 mandates has been improve the access, transparency, the cost, and it has to be real-time, right? So these are the 4 principles of G20 laid down for the cross-border remittances. So again, how do we get more traffic on adhering to these 4 principles? So a lot of work, I think, a lot of discussions are happening, and we believe that hopefully the countries are looking at India as an aspirational story which they can use as their partner to build up their domestic payments.
Okay, well, that was a very quick sneak peek on what Dilip is going to be presenting to the G20 Sherpas in Kumarakom tomorrow. I know you have a flight to catch, Dilip. So thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to Dilip Asbe, the CEO of NPCI. We wish you the very best of luck as you make your pitch to the G20. Gentlemen, let me come back to the two of you. Mr. Subrahmanyam, let's address the issue of what we can expect next. The Niti Aayog, in fact, has put out a paper saying that digital banks could be the future, that India has a facilitating environment in light of Aadhaar, in light of everything else that we've been able to do with UPI, etc., that digital banks may not necessarily be far away in the future.
You see, digital banks is an old idea. I mean, it's at least 20 years old. There are countries which have floated digital banks, but they've just not taken off for a variety of reasons. What you have had is actually computerization of brick and mortar banks, and then your interface with branches has reduced, but banks have not vanished. But now that you see the building blocks are already there, you've got a payment system, you've got an identity system, you've got your presence-less, paperless, cashless, all that happening. Digital banks is just one step away. It's just a question of RBI as a regulator becoming comfortable with the concept, and it's not far away that RBI will also have to accept reality, that this is the way forward. And India is actually best positioned to do that. And once you have digital banks, and of course there'll be a different regulatory setup for that. It's not a payment system, because banking system affects the entire economy. You need some prudential norms to manage that. But once the RBI sets up and recognizes the need for this, understands that technological progress is inevitable. So, and then you recognize that, you set up regulatory system, I think India can be a leader in digital banks. I mean, Niti's paper is a forward-looking paper. I think that's the job of Niti, to wake people up and shake people up and say that, look, if you don't do it, somebody else will do it, and why don't we do it first? And if we do it first, we again become global leaders in that area.
Yes, this was a paper presented by the Niti Aayog in 2022 on how India can take the leap as far as digital banks are concerned.